In episode 9, June fills Luke on the last time she saw Hannah. Luke tries to make June feel better by saying, hey, whatever happened there, that's on them. That is not on you. And then they start talking about a way to get her back. Luke shows June everything that he's compiled trying to get both of them back before June just randomly showed up on a boat. He's exhausted a lot of resources, knocked on a lot of doors, and annoyed a lot of people. And his effort impresses June quite a bit. But as they're going through all their papers, trying to figure out how they're going to get Hannah back, Moira walks in and June lets her know, yeah, I filled Luke in on the last time that I saw Hannah. They then let her know that they're trying to figure out a way to get Hannah back, and Moira points out, you got 86 kids out of Gilead? That brings with it some power. Wield it. The issue is nobody in Canada really has great resources. So June says, well, what about someone who's still in Gilead? And that person is Commander Lawrence. Mark is able to facilitate a phone call between June and Lawrence. And Lawrence is his typical self. You can't really read which way he's leaning. He's just kind of being an asshole. After the pleasantries of, hey, June, how's Canada going? He lets June know that her friend, Janine, is doing well, that she's safe in the comfort of Aunt Lydia. And the fact that Janine is back as a handmaid bothers the hell out of June, but she stays the course, asking for help in facilitating Hannah to Canada, pleading the case that he needs to help because nobody will love Hannah the way that she does. And Lawrence says, your love is like a heartache. So that's when a very upset June brings to the table what she was given by Mark and the government. A revision of a trade agreement between Canada and Gilead if he helps. But he says that's not enough. And then he proposes that she swap 10 of the children that she smuggled out of Gilead for Hannah. And obviously that is a deal breaker. June just shakes her head and says, I can't. And Lawrence jokes that she's gone soft in Toronto. She then once again pleads to him, we love her, we are her family, and I know that you're a good man. And it does seem like this conversation is kind of troubling Lawrence a little bit, as if he would like to help, but he can't. He tells her now is not the time for me to stir up trouble. And even though she's promising protection for Lawrence, he finally cuts in and says, June, you're free. Be grateful for that and move on. Then he hangs up the phone. And while June was calling Lawrence, the Waterfords were having a baby shower. Although it's not exactly the baby shower that Serena had expected. Most of the gifts are coming from the supporters in Canada, including a Maple Leafs jersey, which makes sense because the Waterfords have no defense, and neither do the Maple Leafs, so that pairing fits. But Serena's just kind of down about the situation, and Fred is trying to brighten her spirits by saying, look how many people are here to support us. And he shows her a card, but she looks up and says, oh, what, I can read it now? And that's a shot below the belt for Fred, who admits, yeah, I've made some mistakes, but God has a plan for us. He then suggests that Serena start writing again. She's written books in the past, and they were successful, so do it again. And she actually starts to the next day, when all of a sudden she gets a visitor. And it's Mrs. Putnam. And Mrs. Putnam acts like she's just dropping by, and not the reality of she flew to another country to see her incarcerated friend. Serena is quite surprised by this. And Mrs. Putnam is quite surprised when she sees that Serena has been writing stuff down because that's obviously not allowed in Gilead. She tells Serena that she's been trying to get to her, to talk to her, but it wasn't until Serena got pregnant that the government finally allowed her to show up. And she's shown up bearing gifts from all of the other wives. But the real reason that Mrs. Putnam is shown up is to tell Serena that when the baby comes, the Putnams are more than willing to take the child in, because they figure that Serena and Fred won't be able to because they'll be arrested in Canada. And this kind of takes Serena off guard a little bit, and she informs Mrs. Putnam that she fully expects to walk free. Mrs. Putnam then says, well, that's great, you can come home because that baby belongs in Gilead. But Serena says, yeah, I don't think the commanders feel the same way. Mrs. Putnam says that that is nonsense, though, and that Serena would be welcomed back as a hero because she has her own child. And while Serena and Mrs. Putnam were talking, Commander Putnam and Fred were also having a conversation, and this conversation isn't as civil, because Fred feels like the rest of the commanders have completely forgotten about him and abandoned him in Canada, out of sight, out of mind, even though Commander Putnam says that's not the case. Fred then asks, well, has there been any negotiation on my behalf? And when Commander Putnam asks, such as? Fred gets really pissed off, giving a bunch of examples that the other commanders could have done to get Fred out of Canada. Commander Putnam makes the case, though, that if they were to get Fred out, there would be more kidnappings, and life would be harder on the other commanders. And the only thing that Putnam can promise Fred is thoughts and prayers. And boy, does that piss Fred off. When Fred and Serena link up later that day, Fred starts venting to Serena about how it's like Gilead just erased him. When Fred brings up his son, Serena says they could take him away. Gilead could come for him. They feel like the child belongs to the state, and I'd be left alone because your prospects aren't good. And Fred's a little taken aback, asking, did Mrs. Putnam say that? And Serena says, no, she just asked me to come back, saying I belonged in Gilead. As if I wouldn't face retribution, because we all know that they would send me to the colonies. Or they could even make me a handmaid. This realization is something that Fred hadn't even thought of, and he promises Serena, I will do everything in my power to make sure you and our son are protected. Now, while the Waterfords were trying to figure out how to keep the baby they so desperately wanted for the longest time, June and Luke are trying to figure out how to get their baby back home with them. And Luke has come up with a plan. If Lawrence isn't willing to help, use another commander, Nick. And it's not like Luke wants his wife to go meet with Nick. He knows their past history. But if it can help get Hannah back, he thinks it's worth it. And June is a little hesitant, but Luke is adamant. Go meet with him. It could help. June admits that Nick would do anything for her and Nicole, and if she's bringing Nicole along, then it would be hard for Nick to say no. Luke points out that meeting him in person would be much better than on the phone with other people listening. So June calls up Mark, and they set up a meeting between Nick and June at a random safe house. Mark lets June and Luke know that there will be police that follow her there just to make sure that she's not kidnapped, she's safe. And she doesn't have a lot of time, so make the time she has with Nick count. She then says goodbye to Luke, kissing him, promising to return, and then her and baby Nicole head off to meet with Nick. She gets out at this random safe house, she's looking around, and that's when Nick comes out and sees her for the first time in a while. After the initial pleasantries are out of the way, Nick is able to see his child for the first time in, once again, a while. And he can't believe how much she's grown. But then they head in, and June gets to the point of their meeting. But Nick already knows it. He hands her an envelope full of information saying that as soon as she escaped, he knew that she would keep looking for Hannah. So he started putting some stuff together. He never thought he'd be able to give it to her in person, but he's happy that he's able to. And she can't believe the amount of information that he's been able to gather in a short amount of time. Hannah is now living in Colorado. She's doing really well in school. And there are even pictures of Hannah that were taken by friends of Nick who live in the area. Unfortunately, though, getting Hannah out of Colorado is going to be impossible because there's soldiers everywhere. But this folder of information brings June to tears. Nick then sits down next to her and admits that he should have run away with her when he had the chance. And then they start making out. Even though June has a husband at home, stop cheating, girl, come on. She then picks up Nicole and shows her to Nick and starts explaining what kind of child she is, personality-wise. And then Nick remembers that he actually brought Nicole a present. It's a doll that he bought in Gilead. This family time, though, needs to wrap up. Nick and June say their goodbyes, and right before June heads to her car, Nick says, try to be happy. June then drives home, and on the drive home, she is flooded with a bunch of emotions. When she gets home, she shows Luke the packet of information that Nick had gotten him. And just like June, Luke is crying looking at pictures of his baby girl. June then thanks Mark for making that happen, and then Luke asks, well, how do we get her back? What's the next step? Mark tells them that they have a new asset in Toronto who knows how the system operates. He can help them. But that asset is Fred Waterford, and that shuts the entire room up. Mark informs them that Waterford has agreed to share the information that he has about how Gilead works. And in return, Fred is going to get his freedom because the prosecution has dropped the charges. June is speechless. Luke and Moira are livid, saying, how the hell can you drop the charges against him? Mark realizes that the mood in the room isn't that great and tries to get out of there. And as he's leaving, June says, so my testimony must have spooked him. And you guys knew that, so you used that to flip him. Mark tells her that June testified so the world can hear the truth. And Moira screams at him, so you get your asset and he gets to walk? I mean, what kind of justice is that? And the only thing Mark can say is sometimes you gotta let one fish go to catch a bunch of other bigger fish. He then tells June, bring the intel by my office tomorrow, we'll go through it together. And he heads out. But as he's walking to his car, June storms out of the house, screaming at him, that man is a rapist, and you know what he did to me. At this point, Luke and Moira are holding June back, but they're not doing a really good job because she's screaming at Mark, you know he's a rapist. And then she yells, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And the look in her face says that she's not joking about it. Now, over with Gilead, Janine is back to being a handmaid. She's cleaning some floors. And then all of a sudden, a new handmaid is brought in, given food. And Janine is very surprised when she sees that that new handmaid is Esther Keys. and Esther is refusing to eat. She definitely does not appreciate Aunt Lydia telling her that she has a second chance at redemption by being a handmaid. So she shoves the food away. And when that happens, Aunt Lydia tells the other aunts, get her out of here. Later that night, all of the aunts are eating dinner, and Janine is the one who's acting as a waitress. They're discussing what they're going to do about Esther, and one of them brings up the fact that they might want to cut her tongue out. She's not going to need it anyway. And Janine lets out an audible gasp. This gets the attention of Aunt Ruth and Aunt Irene, who then turn their attention from Esther to Janine. They're trying to figure out what to do with her, and Aunt Lydia says, well, we'll find a posting for her soon. But Ruth says, what commander is going to accept her after her checkered past? And Lydia reminds her that Janine has delivered 2 babies to Gilead. Ruth thinks that Aunt Lydia is giving preferential treatment to Janine. But at the end of the day, it's Aunt Lydia's call. So that night, she starts looking over potential postings for Janine when Janine delivers her some tea. And when she does that, she sees that Aunt Lydia is going over the potential postings, and she's not too happy about it. But Aunt Lydia promises, I'll take care of you. I'll make sure you go to a good home. Janine's about to leave, but then she stops and says, I want to talk to you about Esther Keyes. She's not tough. She's actually terrified. She's putting on a front. She explains the kind of life that Esther had on the farm, how difficult it was. And Janine proposes that what Esther needs is for somebody else to propose what would happen if she continues not to eat, i.e. the punishment. And that somebody is Janine. Aunt Lydia thinks it's a good idea. So, the next day, Janine goes to visit Esther, who is in that room with the bed, you're chained up. Not the best situation for anybody. And Esther thinks that it was Janine who snuck in. And she immediately starts eating the food that Janine brought her. When Janine mentions Chicago, Esther gets really excited, asking, well, how did you get there? Was June with you? And Janine explains everything about how they got to Chicago, but admits that she was kind of relieved when she got picked up by people from Gilead. When Esther asks, well, is June still in Chicago? Janine snaps at her, forget June. She's not here. We're here, and you have to take care of yourself now. And it's at that moment that Esther realizes that Janine didn't sneak in. She was told to go in. Esther then spits out the food and says, I don't care what they do to me, but Janine says, yes, you do. Because they're not going to let you die. They'll just keep hurting you again and again until you give in. That's literally their job. And this message works because Esther gives in. And shortly after that, Janine escorts Esther over to Aunt Lydia, Aunt Ruth, Aunt Irene, and Esther is saying all of the Gilead crap. May the Lord open, blessed be the fruit. And Aunt Lydia gives a big praise be and is very proud of Janine for getting Esther on track. Thanks for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Like the video if you liked it. Hit thumbs down if you don't. Be nice in the comments section. Nasty comments hurt my feelings. I work hard on these. If I make a mistake, it happens. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen, it'll be up soon. Sharing is caring. Put it on your MySpace page or your away message. And check out my podcast, Scene Invaders, wherever you listen to podcasts.